Neama Rahmani, who's a former federal prosecutor, who's on the other side. We border the Atlantic, he borders the Pacific. Neama, you've been following this case with me since the beginning, and you taught me how to say the correct name, the correct spelling, the correct pronunciation of our last case when we were watching it on here. Prokopovitz. I know it well now. So you're really good. So let me ask you this. When the defense rests, or prosecution rests their case and defense starts, what do you look to put on? Here they put on a police officer to talk about excited delirium. Was it the right move or the wrong move?
Yeah, I think it's the right move, Linda. You know, excited delirium is often referred to as junk science, not accepted by, the AMA and a lot of physicians, but you really have to attack the meds in this case. The defense, the deck is stacked against them. There's a lot of evidence here. There's a lot of officers. I really like how they started their case. They started with the 2019 arrest of George Floyd, and they called police officers because their theory of the case is this is civilians or this is George Floyd versus the police officers. We saw that the state did a good job of taking over that narrative during their case in chief, but I like how they started with the 2019 arrest. That was a key win for the defense to get that evidence in. And obviously we know that they're going to talk about training. They're going to talk about use of force. So they've moved actually very quickly today, a lot quicker than I anticipated.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They actually started with the video, then went to the excited delirium. Here, George Floyd says, "You're not going to shoot me, are you? Don't shoot me." And the police officer says several times, "I'm not going to shoot you. I'm not going to shoot you." But then another one says, "But I'm going to tase you." It just seemed to put that in a different light than when I watched it a month ago when the defense first kind of mentioned it, or maybe it was only 3 weeks ago, or maybe it was only 2 weeks ago. But given the fact that we did have both allegedly a mistaken taser that was a gun that shot this young man, and hearing George Floyd use both those terms, do you think the jury is going to see it in a different light since they have not been sequestered?
I think it absolutely will affect them. Here's another police-involved shooting of a black man 10 miles away from where our current trial of Derek Chauvin is happening. And, although Officer Kim Carter has resigned, I fully expect to see second-degree manslaughter charges. Unfortunately, this has happened a couple times before in other states. Those were the charges in those cases. Obviously, we're dealing with that same charge here in this case. So, these jurors, they're going home. They're not sequestered. It's going to be impossible for them not to hear about it because it's all over the news. It's all over social media, and it's been the subject of either protests or riots, depending on what side you're on. So no question that they will be affected by this. And I think this is a terrible fact for the Wright family, but also really potentially devastating to the defense in this case because it's going to put even more pressure on these jurors to convict if there wasn't significant pressure already. I think the state is losing this witness, and I understand sometimes you have these folks that are white-collar defense attorneys or civil defense attorneys, and they conduct cross-examination like it's a deposition, but the state is going very, very long with this witness. They're not getting a whole lot out of him. They did score some key points, but obviously this is a stylistic preference. I would like to get in and out because at some point it's clear that even if Brodd thinks George Floyd was resisting, he's no longer resisting, and Chauvin's knee is still on his neck. So I understand the sort of surgical approach, but he's going much, much longer than the direct examination. And if I were Stephen here, I would get in, get out, and just be a little more precise in my questioning, score your points, and move on to the next witness.
Whether or not Derek Chauvin at some point ever took his knee off his body. And the witness said, well, I think he moved the pressure back towards his shins, okay? Indicating that that would take the knee off George Floyd's body. And he saw it a number of times in the videos. But when the solicitor asked him where, he didn't know where. Wouldn't you just play the videos again?
Yeah, I would. I mean, that's an important point. And again, I feel like he's asking one too many questions. We saw this during jury selection with the defense, and now we're seeing it during cross-examination with the state. He got some good testimony, asked the additional question too many, and then Brodd was able to come back and clarify that, well, I did think that he was shifting his weight and therefore relieving the pressure on George Floyd. That's not something that's really helpful for the state. Third officer involved shooting where the officer claimed at least that he or she was trying to discharge a taser and shot a firearm. So can't believe this has happened. They're on opposite sides of the hip. But, you know, taking the officer at her word, she immediately said, holy, I'm not going to say the expletive, I shot him. So the facts and circumstances do suggest to me, whether you want to call it accidental, whether you want to call it negligent, I would call it gross negligence or culpable negligence under Minnesota law. It does appear that the officer did not intend to shoot Daunte Wright, such that murder charges, either second or third degree in Minnesota, would be appropriate.
Hard on the prosecutor before. Did he redeem himself, and was he successful ending with a strong ending in his cross?
Yes, Linda. Stephen Slisher did a great job those last 5 minutes. That's great testimony that Chauvin maintained the same position, even though George Floyd was no longer responsive and that the crowd was not threatening. I love how he closed that cross-examination there.
Neama, hope to see you next week.